The Persian Gulf shimmered under a relentless midday sun, the heat haze distorting the horizon into a fluid, trembling line where the sky met the water. On the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the air smelled of jet fuel and ozone, a heavy, suffocating scent that clung to the flight crews prepping the F-35C Lightning IIs. Beneath the armored steel of the carrier's hull, inside the Combat Direction Center, the temperature was a controlled 68 degrees, but the tension was hot enough to blister paint. Rear Admiral Thomas Sterling stood before the main tactical display, his eyes locked on the crimson web of data feeds streaming in from the E-2D, Advanced Hawkeye circling at 30,000 feet. The geopolitical situation had deteriorated rapidly over the last 48 hours, shifting from diplomatic standoffs to a silence that was far louder than any shout. Intelligence suggested Tehran was done talking. Sterling watched the digital map, waiting for the move everyone knew was coming, the move that would define the next century of naval warfare. The silence on the bridge was shattered not by a scream, but by the calm, rhythmic chirping of the AN Spy-6 radar systems. Contact, the tactical officer announced, his voice devoid of emotion, drilled into flatness by years of simulation. Massive bloom originating from the Bushehr province coastline, bearing 030, speed 100 knots, altitude 500 feet. Sir, the count is rising rapidly. We have 200, 300, estimated swarm size exceeding 1,000 units. Sterling didn't flinch. This was the nightmare scenario war planners had sweated over for a decade. A saturation attack. Cheap, mass-produced suicide drones. A swarm of buzzing locusts designed to overwhelm the billion-dollar defenses of a carrier strike group by sheer weight of numbers. Conventional wisdom said the Aegis destroyers would run out of missiles before the enemy ran out of drones. But the Abraham Lincoln was no longer operating on conventional wisdom. Sterling keyed the mic for the strike group. All hands, this is the Admiral. Condition red. Weapons free. Initiate Project Helios. Let's show them what the future looks like. On the starboard sponson of the carrier and the decks of the accompanying destroyers, the new generation of directed energy weapons pivoted with eerie silence. There were no hydraulic whines, no clanking of loading mechanisms. These were solid-state fiber lasers, integrated directly into the ship's power grid, capable of firing as long as the nuclear reactors hummed. As the Iranian drone swarm crested the horizon, a black cloud of carbon fiber and plastic moving with insectoid purpose, the engagement began. It was not the thunderous barrage of the past. There were no trails of smoke from surface-to-air missiles, no deafening booms of 5-inch guns. Instead, the air simply began to burn. Invisible beams of concentrated photons, moving at the speed of light, reached out and touched the leading edge of the swarm. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment, the lead drones were speeding toward the fleet. The next, their optical sensors were fried blind, their control surfaces melted into slag, and their fuel cells ignited. From the bridge, it looked as if an invisible hand was swatting the drones from the sky. Small fireballs erupted in a staccato rhythm, hundreds of them, creating a wall of smoke and debris. The laser systems hit multiple targets simultaneously, the algorithms prioritizing threats in microseconds, shifting the beam from one drone to the next faster than the human eye could follow. It was a massacre of technology. The swarm, designed to terrify, was being surgically dismantled with the indifference of a grandmaster playing a novice. The drones crumpled, wings shearing off as the lasers sliced through structural spars, tumbling into the Gulf in hissing clouds of steam. Inside the Iranian command center, deep within a hardened bunker hundreds of miles away, the mood shifted from triumphant aggression to confused panic. Their telemetry screens, which had been full of green active markers, were turning red and blinking out in rapid succession. They had launched $1 billion worth of munitions, a swarm meant to choke the American fleet, yet they hadn't registered a single impact. The American ships weren't even maneuvering. They were holding their course, sailing straight into the teeth of the attack, shielded by a dome of directed energy that nothing could penetrate. The psychological impact was devastating. The Iranian commanders watched as their ultimate weapon, the strategy they had banked their regime's survival on, was erased without the Americans firing a single bullet. On the Lincoln, the tempo of the engagement increased. The lasers were now operating at full power, the heat exchangers working furiously to dump the excess thermal energy into the ocean. The air around the ships shimmered, the atmosphere ionized by the sheer intensity of the beams. To the sailors on deck, it was a light show of destruction. A drone would dive, aiming for the bridge, only to suddenly white-hot and disintegrate mid-air, its debris raining down harmlessly into the wake of the carrier. The swarm, once a coherent cloud, was fractured. The AI guiding the drones couldn't adapt to an enemy that struck at the speed of light. There was no evasion possible. You could not dodge a laser. If they could kill you. Admiral Sterling watched the counter drop. 700 destroyed. 800. The ocean surface was littered with the burning wreckage of the failed offensive. Status of the swarm? He asked. Remaining contacts turning back, sir, the tactical officer replied. They're breaking off. Sterling's expression hardened. He knew this wasn't the end. The swarm was just the jab, the attempt to draw blood and exhaust the magazine. But they hadn't exhausted anything. The lasers didn't run out of ammo. They only needed power, and the Lincoln had power to spare. The defense had been absolute, a demonstration of technological supremacy that rendered traditional swarm tactics obsolete in minutes. But defense does not win wars. Defense merely buys time for the offense to wind up. Transition the strike group to offensive posture, Sterling ordered, his voice cutting through the hum of the combat direction center. They took their shot. Now they pay the price. Prepare the air wing. Spin up the Tomahawks on the destroyers. I want a firing solution on every launch site, every radar installation, and every command node that supported that attack. We aren't just neutralizing the threat. We are removing the capability permanently. The deck of the Abraham Lincoln roared to life. This was the pivot point. The shield was coming down, and the sword was being drawn. The F-35s, fully loaded with stealth munitions, taxied the catapults. The steam swirled, the engines screamed, and the first jet shot off the deck, banking hard toward the hostile coast. The silent inferno of the laser defense was over. The thunder was about to begin. The transition from defense to offense was seamless, a terrifying choreography of violence that the U.S. Navy had perfected over decades. While the smoking remnants of the drone swarm bobbed in the Persian Gulf, the sky above the USS Abraham Lincoln darkened with the silhouette of American air power. The F-35 Sea Lightning E's were the tip of the spear, ghost planes that existed on enemy radar only as intermittent glitches until it was too late. They pushed deep into Iranian airspace, utilizing their advanced electronic warfare suites to jam and confuse the S-300 and Bavar 3 Centura's air defense batteries. To the operators on the ground, their screens became a blizzard of false positive, phantom squadrons appearing and disappearing, masking the true location of the strike force. The confusion was the weapon. Before a single missile was fired, the command and control structure of the opposing force was blinded, deafened, and isolated. Back in the launch tubes of the guided missile destroyers surrounding the Lincoln, the Tomahawk Block V cruise missiles ignited. They erupted from the vertical launch systems in pillars of fire and smoke, arching over the carrier before leveling off and dropping to wave-top height. These were not the dumb missiles of the past. These were networked, intelligent machines capable of changing targets mid-flight, communicating with each other to optimize the angle of attack. As they crossed the coastline, they fanned out, skirting terrain features, hugging the valleys, invisible to the frantic radar sweeps searching the skies. The target list was comprehensive. It wasn't just the drone launch sites, it was the entire infrastructure of aggression. Fuel depots, missile fabrication plants, naval bases housing the fast attack craft all were marked for deletion. The first impact hit the Busher command bunker. A bunker-busting munition, guided the laser designator from a high-altitude stealth drone, punched through feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. The ground shook for miles. Inside the command center, the confusion turned to oblivion. In the span of 20 minutes, the cohesive military network of the adversary was shattered. The F-35s released their payloads, precision-guided glide bombs that found the ventilation shafts of underground facilities and the radar dishes of surface-to-air missile sites. The sky over the Iranian coast lit up not with the chaotic fire of battle, but with the precise, rhythmic flashes of systematic destruction. It was a demonstration of hyperwarfare, speed, precision, and overwhelming information dominance. Admiral Sterling watched the battle unfold via the real-time feeds in the CDC. The dominance was total. The enemy couldn't shoot back because they couldn't see what was hitting them. The swarm attack had been their ace in the hole, and the laser grid had burned it to ash. Now, stripped of their offensive capability, they were exposed. The script of the future was being written in fire. This wasn't an invasion, it was a punitive dismantlement. The objective was to strip the regime of its ability to project power beyond its borders for a generation. The destroyers unleashed a second volley, this time targeting the coastal missile batteries that threatened shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. The missiles struck with pinpoint accuracy, turning the strategic choke point to a graveyard of twisted metal. As the sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the Gulf, the full scope of the devastation became clear. The Iranian naval assets that had soared to support drone swarm were caught in the open water. Without air cover, without radar, they were sitting ducks. The F-818 Super Hornets, operating in beast mode, with heavy external loadouts, descended upon the flotilla. Anti-ship missiles skimmed the water, slamming into frigates and fast attack boats. The horizon was punctured by black smoke rising from burning ships. The message was being broadcast to the world in high definition. The era of asymmetric threats challenging a carrier strike group was over. If you launch a swarm, we will burn it. If you threaten the fleet, we will dismantle your military brick by brick. The aftermath was a haunting silence. The roar of the jets faded as they returned to the carrier, catching the wires and taxiing to the elevators. The lasers powered down, their job done. The Abraham Lincoln sailed through the darkening waters, a floating city of steel that weathered the storm and delivered the thunder. On the bridge, Admiral Sterling looked out at the distant glow of fires on the horizon. He knew this scenario would be studied in war colleges for decades. It proved that the future belonged to those who'd control the electromagnetic spectrum, who could marry directed energy defense with stealth offense. The provocation had been met not just with force, but with a capability gap so wide it was insurmountable. In the days that followed, the geopolitical landscape shifted. The regime, humiliated and stripped of its military teeth, faced internal collapse. The iron dome of the sea had proven impenetrable, and the hammer of the air wing had precapable. The illusion of parity was gone. The U.S. had demonstrated that it could fight a war without putting boots on the ground, destroying an adversary's capacity to fight in less than 12 hours. The drone swarm, once feared as the great equalizer, was revealed to be nothing more than kindling for the laser fires. As the Lincoln turned back toward the open ocean, the stars came out over the Gulf, indifferent to the destruction below, shining down on a fleet that remained the undisputed master of the seas. The world had watched, and the world now knew. To challenge the giant was to invite extinction.